Okay, today we are going to be going through Chapter 3, Section 1 and Chapter 3, Section 2. There's a lot of overlap between these two sections, so that's why we're going to go ahead and do them all in one video. Our first set of vocabulary words here, the first one is parallel lines. I think we all kind of remember what parallel lines are. Parallel lines go on in both directions and never intersect. Two lines that never intersect is what those are. And in geometry, in order to show that two lines are parallel, in a diagram you would have two lines kind of like this, arrows on both ends, and then they would indicate these two lines are parallel by putting little red triangles on those lines. Parallel planes, a lot like parallel lines, also never intersect. So in the diagram down in the lower right, some parallel lines would be like AB is parallel. Notice that two vertical lines shows parallel. AB would be parallel to EF. A couple other examples, AD would be parallel to BC. So if you notice, that would be these here. So you had AB and EF. AB is right here and EF is here. Those are two parallel lines. And then AD, which would be this line right here, and BC, which is the back of the box right there. Those would all be parallel. So let's erase those a little bit here. And then when we're talking about parallel planes, it's the same idea. So like when we're talking parallel planes, like the front of the box and the back of the box would be parallel to each other, because if they went on and on forever, they would never actually intersect. So when we're thinking about parallel planes, we'd be at the front of the box here that I have highlighted. That's the front of the box. And the back of the box, which I'm going to put in green here, or in blue. The front and the back would be parallel planes. Okay, intersecting planes would be like the side of the box and the top of the box, where they would intersect at a line. Skew lines might be something that's kind of new to you guys. Skew lines means that there are two lines in different planes that never intersect. Okay, so if you want to start writing that down, they would be two lines in different planes that don't intersect. Oops. That is supposed to be, this is supposed to be down here for skew lines. I'm sorry. So make sure you're putting out the skew lines definition. I wrote it in the wrong spot. So an example of skew lines would be here. So an example of skew lines would be if you were looking at, say, AE and BC. They are in two different planes and they are going to be skew. Another example would be GH and AD. Coincident lines, much like if two things happen at a coincident kind of a thing, means that they happen at the same time. So coincident lines are essentially just the same line. So for instance, down here, EI and IH, those would be the same line if you extended them off in both directions. And then lastly here we have a transversal line, which is essentially a line that cuts through two or more other lines. So a transversal line, if you have two lines and then you have a line that comes through it, this line right here that cuts through is called the transversal. Okay, here we have diagrams of those different types of lines. Parallel lines, you can see they're parallel because they have their little triangles here and they never intersect. So the number of points of intersection would be none. Intersecting lines intersect at exactly 1 point, and coincident lines have infinitely many points of intersection because they have every single point on that line intersects with the point on the line on top of it. All right, so here we're going to look at some classifications. This is a right rectangular prism, which means all the angles in this are right angles. And they want us to classify it as parallel, intersecting, coincident, or skew. So if we look AB and BC, AB is this line right here. BC is going across the back. And you can notice they intersect at point B. So these are intersecting lines. AD and BC, that's going to be this line right here across the front, AD and BC. If you notice the lines in blue, those are going to be parallel lines because they would never intersect. EI and IH, that's this line across the bottom, EI and IH is one line, so essentially those are going to be coincident lines. BF and EH, let me erase some of these marks I have on here because it's getting a little crazy. If we look at BF, that one is the back corner back here, and EH, those are two different planes and they will never intersect. So this one is going to be skew. EF and CG, that's going to be this bottom part here, and CG, those are also in different planes and will never intersect, so those are also skew. And AB and GH, even though it kind of looks like they might be skew because they're on different planes, there's actually a plane that would go through the middle of the box, kind of like you could slice a piece of cheese, so those would actually be parallel. Okay, so now we are going to start looking at some angle measures. These are just two intersecting lines, and if you notice, you've got one angle measure that's given at 155 degrees. These are two intersecting lines, so we know a couple of things right away, that they intersect at a point, and if this angle right here is 155 degrees, angle Y, also a vertical angle, which means they are equal, is also 155 degrees. So angle Y is also going to be 155. Angle X and angle Z are also vertical angles, which means they will have the same measure, but we need to figure out what those measures happen to be. So if you notice, 155 and angle X make a straight line, which means they are supplementary. So we know that the measure of angle X plus 155 is going to equal 180, which means angle X is going to be 25 degrees, and if angle X is 25 degrees, angle Z will have the same measure. Now we're going to start looking at parallel lines that are cut by a transversal. Hopefully some of these vocabulary words are ones that you remember maybe from pre-algebra or algebra. But we have corresponding angles, alternate interior angles, alternate exterior angles, and consecutive interior angles. Okay. With all of these, we are always going to have one angle that comes from the top four set of angles and one angle that is going to come from the bottom set of angles. And if we think about corresponding things that correspond are basically like in the same spot or they have something in common. Well, corresponding angles in this case are going to be the angles that correspond to the other one or in the same location. So for instance, angle 1 corresponds to angle 5. So if we're looking for pairs of corresponding angles, angle 1 and angle 5 are corresponding angles. Another pair of corresponding angles would be 2 and 6. They are both in the top right. Okay, and then if we look again here, we've got angle 3 is in the lower left and angle 7 is in the lower left. So we'd have angle 3 and angle 7. And then 4 and 8 are both in the lower right, so they